Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're moving past the usual stories of big battles or, impressive buildings. We're looking at something maybe more fundamental.
Absolutely. We're digging into the legal foundations, the sort of the blueprints for how power actually worked in ancient states.
Right. The core question is,
Hmm.
how did these places, democracies, empires, whatever,
Yeah.
actually keep their leaders in check?
Hmm.
How did they build in accountability?
That's a great question because, we tend to oversimplify. We think, oh, it was just kings or mobs.
Yeah.
But the sources show us these really often quite sophisticated systems. They were trying to contain the very power structures they'd created.
So ways to manage who gets to judge whom, essentially.
Exactly. Whether that was giving every citizen the right to challenge things in court, like in Athens, or having a really strict top-down system based on your social status, like in Rome.
And that contrast, that's really what we're exploring today. We've got sources that show this, noisy participatory accountability in democratic Athens versus the much more centralized, status-obsessed legal world of imperial Rome.
Yeah, we're trying to map out the rules that governed everything from, say, bitter political rivals suing each other in Athens.
To the final word resting with the Roman emperor himself. Okay, let's get into Athens first.
So, starting with Athens, you're looking at a place that really fundamentally changed the game for the citizen and the courts. The sources talk a lot about the early democratic reforms. People often point to Cleisthenes, maybe building on Solon's older ideas.
Right.
And these weren't just like minor tweaks to the rules. They actually aimed to create new ways of thinking, new civic feelings.
In these feelings, they become the sort of psychological software of the democracy, right? Things like protecting free speech, making sure the law applied equally, at least in theory, to all citizens.
And this really powerful idea of identifying with the Commonwealth, the polis as a whole.
Yeah, this feeling that being Athenian trumped your local village loyalty or your tribe, that was kind of new, wasn't it?
It really was, and it was constantly reinforced by how the democracy actually worked day to day. Take the assembly, the ecclesia.
Okay.
It met really often. Anyone could speak. Debate was encouraged. So citizens weren't just passive listeners. They had to learn how to persuade people, but also how to listen critically to others' arguments.
So it's like on-the-job training in citizenship.
Pretty much. And this constant participation meant people felt their own well-being was tied directly to what the majority decided and to the laws the people enforced. Sovereignty really rested with the citizens, and they embraced it because, well, it was theirs.
But that participation, that power in the hands of the people, it also meant constant fights over which part of the people's government should hold the most sway. And a big flashpoint was the courts, specifically this old institution, the Areopagus.
Ah, yes, the Areopagus. It was this very traditional, very respected council, historically powerful.
Made up of former top officials, the archons, right? So basically the political elite, even after some earlier changes. Lifetime membership, sitting on the Hill of Ares. Very prestigious.
Exactly. But for the growing democracy, this body looked like a bit of a roadblock, an aristocratic check on the people's will.
Which brings us to Ephialtes and his reforms.
Yeah.
This was what, just a few years before Aeschylus's big trilogy, the Orestia?
That's the timeline, yeah. About 4 years before. And Ephialtes went right for the Areopagus's core powers.
What kind of powers are we talking about?
Well, traditionally, it had broad oversight, keeping an eye on magistrates, supervising the laws generally, even acting as a sort of moral guardian for the city.
Oh, okay.
Ephialtes basically took most of that away. He transferred those oversight functions to the popular courts, the deacons area, with their huge juries chosen by lot, and to the Council of 500.
So he kind of gutted the Areopagus, politically speaking.
Pretty much. It was left with its ancient but now much narrower role, presiding over murder trials and a few specific religious cases, like famously damaging sacred olive trees.
Wow, that's a massive shift of power away from the old guard. And the reaction was intense.
Intense is putting it mildly. The stakes were incredibly high. Ephialtes was assassinated not long after. It shows just how controversial this was, how violently that power shift was contested.
And you mentioned Aeschylus.
Yeah.
The Oresteia actually touches on this.
It does in the final play, The Eumenides. Aeschylus stages the mythical founding of the Areopagus court right there on the Hill of Ares, with Athena herself establishing it.
So he's giving the audience who just lived through Ephialtes' reforms and assassination a kind of origin story, a way to process this massive political upheaval involving this ancient institution.
Precisely. It's like providing a charter myth to help stabilize things after the shock. But, while the composition of the courts was crucial, the real everyday power for accountability in Athens was arguably put directly into every citizen's hands through a specific legal tool.
You mean the graphing?
Exactly, the graphe. This is central to how Athenian democracy policed itself. The sources make a clear distinction. You had the dike idia, which was a private lawsuit.
Like if my neighbor steals my stuff, only I can sue him.
Right. It's about direct personal injury. But the graphe was a public suit. And here's the radical part. Any citizen with their full rights could bring a graphe.
Any citizen. Against anyone.
Pretty much, for offenses considered harmful to the community as a whole. It wasn't about personal loss, it was about protecting the polis.
So, give me some examples. What kind of things could trigger a graphe?
Oh, serious stuff. Treason, maybe proposing illegal decrees, that's the Graphe Paranomon. We should probably talk more about embezzlement of public funds, cowardice in battle.
Proposing illegal decrees. So you could actually sue someone for suggesting a law that went against existing laws.
Yes. That's the Graphe Paranomon, the prosecution against unconstitutional proposals. It was a huge check on the assembly itself. If someone proposed a new law or decree, any citizen could challenge it in court, arguing it conflicted with established laws.
And if the court agreed.
If the jury found the proposal was indeed illegal or unconstitutional, the law was immediately repealed and the person who proposed it could face serious penalties, fines, even loss of political rights.
Wow. So proposing new laws was actually pretty risky.
It really was. It made politicians think twice, encouraging respect for legal tradition. It effectively gave the law courts, these mass citizen juries, the power of judicial review over the assembly. The rule of law, as interpreted by the people in court, was supreme.
That's fascinating. And the graphe could also be used to protect vulnerable people.
Yes, that was another key function. People who couldn't legally represent themselves, like orphans or heiresses, epicleroi, the state could step in via a graphe initiated by any concerned citizen. It turned accountability into this shared public duty. Every politician, every official knew that any action, any proposal could potentially land them in court, prosecuted by any one of their fellow citizens.
Okay, so you have this system, the graphe, including the Graphe Paranomon for laws, where basically anyone can haul anyone else into court for public matters. That must have made politics incredibly combative.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just debates in the assembly. Political rivalry often played out as legal warfare in the courts. If you wanted to sink your opponent's policy, you didn't just argue against it, you sued them. You tried to prove their proposal was illegal or that they were corrupt or incompetent.
And the classic example of this is the endless feud between Demosthenes and Aeschines.
Exactly. Their rivalry spanned decades, and it was fought tooth and nail through speeches, yes, but also through relentless lawsuits and counter-lawsuits. It's a perfect illustration of trying to achieve political accountability via the courts.
Let's look at Aeschines' attack on Demosthenes first. What was his angle?
Aeschines went after Demosthenes hard regarding the peace treaty Athens made with Philip of Macedon. He basically accused Demosthenes of taking bribes and misconduct during the negotiations.
Trying to pin Athens' subsequent problems with Philip directly onto Demosthenes' alleged corruption.
Precisely. It was a legal strategy to say, this bad outcome is your fault, Demosthenes, because you acted illegally and corruptly.
And Demosthenes didn't just defend himself on the facts, did he? He went straight for Aeschines' character.
He did. That was standard Athenian legal tactics. Demosthenes didn't just refute the charges, he painted Aeschines as, I think the source calls him a perfidious crook.
Strong words.
Very. And he backed it up with these incredibly specific, damaging stories. He claimed Aeschines was constantly having private meetings with Philip. The most famous bit is him claiming Aeschines was seen coming out of Philip's tent late one night in a place called Phere. And then, crucially, after the official Athenian delegation left, Aeschines allegedly stayed behind alone with Philip for a whole night and a day.
Wow. That kind of detail, being caught alone with the enemy, that's designed to destroy trust completely.
Absolutely, because it wasn't just about policy differences anymore. It tapped into this deep Athenian concern with bad citizenship. Your moral character was constantly on trial.
And this idea of character, or indria manliness, courage, was central.
Hugely central. Public life demanded integrity. Think about the Ephebic Oath. Young soldiers swore it explicitly mentions shunning shameful behavior and not deserting your post. Failing these basic standards, even just being accused of it, could ruin you politically, especially if someone brought a graphe based on it.
And these character attacks were used politically all the time, even if the evidence was maybe a bit thin, like Demosthenes accusing his other rival, Medius.
Right, the Medius case. Demosthenes was suing Medius for assault, but he didn't just focus on the assault. He threw in accusations that Medius had deserted military service 3 times.
Was that even relevant to the assault case?
Legally, probably not directly, but politically, absolutely. It seems Medius might have accused Demosthenes of desertion first. It was pure mudslinging, tit for tat. The goal wasn't necessarily proving the desertion charges beyond doubt. It was about painting Medius as a coward and a bad citizen in front of the jury.
So the Graphe system, while designed for accountability, could also be weaponized for purely political hits, sometimes using flimsy character claims or potentially frivolous accusations about illegal proposals.
That was the risk. It could paralyze decision-making if people were too scared to propose anything controversial, or if the courts got clogged with politically motivated lawsuits. But it also meant that public figures lived under intense scrutiny.
And that scrutiny wasn't just about politics or military service. It hit their wallets too, right? With the liturgies.
Yes, the liturgies. These were major public services. The wealthiest citizens were expected to fund things like equipping a warship, a trireme, or paying for a dramatic chorus at a festival. It was a huge financial burden.
And seen as a core civic duty. Dodging it was frowned upon.
Deeply frowned upon. But naturally, the rich looked for ways to, let's say, minimize their apparent wealth to avoid getting nominated for these expensive duties. Land was the main asset, hard to hide completely, but you could try to obscure its true value.
How do they do that?
Well, one common trick was owning land scattered across different districts, the demes, making it harder for officials in any one deme to get a full picture of your total worth. Owning land outside Attica helped too.
Okay, that makes sense. But you mentioned something about using the law itself. These stone markers, the horoi.
Ah, the horoi. This is quite clever in a way. A horos was a stone marker placed on a piece of land to publicly declare that the property had a debt secured against it, like a mortgage.
Right.
So a wealthy person who wanted to appear less wealthy for liturgy purposes could arrange to have a large, legally registered debt placed on their property, marked by a horos.
Even if the debt wasn't entirely real, or maybe it was owed to a family member?
Exactly. The debt might be nominal or easily manageable, but the horos stone was legal proof of an encumbrance. To the officials assessing your wealth for a liturgy, that visible marker significantly reduced the perceived net value of your land.
So you're using a legal mechanism designed to protect lenders to actually shield your assets from public duty.
Precisely. It highlights this tension. The law respected property rights and contracts, symbolized by the horos, but those same legal tools could be manipulated by the elite to get around the democratic expectation of contributing to the common good. It shows the constant push and pull in the Athenian system.
Okay, so if Athens was all about decentralized citizen juries, legal battles, the Graphe Paranomon, and this constant scrutiny, Rome, especially the empire, presents a completely different picture. Much more top-down.
Absolutely. A total contrast in many ways. As Rome shifted from republic to empire, the whole legal process changed. We move away from the republican jury courts, the questions.
Where a magistrate kind of managed the case, but a citizen jury decided.
Right. We move away from that towards the dominant imperial system called cognitio extra ordinem.
Cognitio extra ordinem. Okay, break that down. What does it mean?
Literally, it's something like jurisdiction outside the established order. But what it meant in practice was a move towards a system much more like a modern court. Under cognitio, the magistrate, often an imperial official or someone delegated by one, handled the entire case. They investigated, they heard the evidence, they decided the verdict, and they determined the sentence.
So judge, jury, and sentencer all rolled into one official.
Pretty much. It bypassed the whole idea of a popular jury verdict that was central to the Republic and also to Athens. This cognitio system was much more efficient from the state's point of view.
Easier to control.
Definitely easier to control, more streamlined. It suited a large, centralized bureaucracy. It allowed the imperial power structure to apply justice directly without the sort of unpredictability of a large citizen jury.
And sitting right at the top of this whole pyramid was the emperor.
The emperor was the ultimate source of law and justice. His personal authority, his auctoritas, was immense. It wasn't just about formal legal powers, it was this supreme prestige and influence.
And the clearest example of this is the right to appeal directly to Caesar.
Yes, the appeal to Caesar. Any Roman citizen, theoretically, facing a serious charge, especially a capital one, could appeal over the head of the provincial governor directly to the emperor in Rome.
And we see this play out in the sources, like with the Apostle Paul appealing his case before Governor Festus. Festus seemed unsure, but ultimately sent him to Rome.
That's a classic case study. Festus might have had the legal grounds to potentially release Paul, maybe, but politically, sending him to Rome was the safe option.
Why safe?
Because making a final decision yourself, especially one that might upset powerful groups back in Rome or locally, was risky for a governor's career. If you got it wrong, or if the emperor later disagreed, you were in trouble. It was much safer to pass the buck, validate the appeal, and let the ultimate authority in Rome decide. The appeal process, especially in these extra ordinum cases, became almost automatic for capital charges involving citizens.
So the appeal wasn't just about justice for the accused, it was also a political safety valve for the officials below the emperor.
You could certainly see it that way. And this centralization of power meant that key officials in Rome saw their own judicial powers grow significantly. The urban prefect, for instance.
He was like the mayor and police chief of Rome.
Basically, yes. Initially, his power to sentence people might have been limited. Maybe he couldn't impose the death penalty or permanent exile originally.
But that changed over time.
It did. The sources show his jurisdiction gradually expanding. Eventually, the urban prefect could handle capital cases. It makes administrative sense, really. In a huge empire, you can't have every single serious case landing on the emperor's desk. You need to delegate that supreme judicial authority to trusted, high-ranking officials.
And when a case did reach the emperor, it wasn't just him sitting alone as a judge.
Rarely, if ever. The emperor's court, his concilium, almost always included his advisors, his amici, friends. These were top senators, equestrians, maybe the praetorian prefects. They'd discuss the case, offer opinions, effectively acting as part of the judicial process.
So the line between political advising and legal judgment gets really blurry.
Completely blurred. Tacitus even describes a situation where Burrus, a praetorian prefect, was accused in a case being heard by the emperor, yet he was still allowed to give his opinion along with the other judges.
Wow.
It just underscores that in Rome, high status and political connection were inseparable from the administration of justice. Justice flowed down from the top, from auctoritas, embodied by the emperor and his inner circle.
Okay, so this really highlights the fundamental difference. Athenian law, whatever its issues, was mostly about citizenship. Roman law, especially imperial Roman law, seems deeply tied to your social status.
That's the absolute core distinction. We move from a system aiming for, well, at least theoretical equality before the law for citizens, to a system built on legal privilege. In Rome, who you were, your rank, your background determined your legal rights, how you were treated by the courts, and what punishments you could face.
And this wasn't just informal bias, it was written into the law. The penalties were different.
Explicitly different. Roman law formally divided free people into two broad categories for punishment. The honestiores, the more honorable people.
Like senators, knights, high officials, veterans.
Exactly. And then the humiliores, the lower or more humble people, basically everyone else. The penalty for the same crime could be drastically different depending on which group you belong to.
What are some clear examples of that?
Well, the most brutal punishments were generally reserved for humiliores and slaves. Crucifixion, for example, was primarily seen as a slave's penalty, though sometimes applied to lower status citizens.
And the honestiores were protected from things like that.
Yes, they had specific legal exemptions. An honestiore couldn't be sentenced to the mines, couldn't be thrown to wild beasts in the arena, and significantly couldn't legally be beaten or tortured to extract evidence, things that were standard practice for humiliores and slaves.
So your status was literally a shield against the worst forms of state violence and degradation. If an honestiore did commit a capital crime, what happened instead?
The typical punishment for an honestiore facing a capital conviction was often decapitation, considered a quicker, more honorable death or exile, sometimes with confiscation of property. These were still severe, but they avoided the extreme public humiliation and suffering associated with punishments like crucifixion or the arena. The law respected their dignitas, their status, even in death.
And the state could actually grant this privileged status. It wasn't just inherited.
No, the state actively used legal privilege as a reward or incentive. A key example is veterans. Veterans and their sons were often granted the same legal privileges as decurions, the local town councilors who were part of the honestiores.
So serving in the army could literally elevate your family's legal standing for generations.
Exactly. It was a way to reward loyalty and service and integrate these important groups into the privileged class. It shows the system wasn't totally rigid, but status was always the defining factor.
We also see this status obsession in laws about social behavior, like the Julian law on adultery.
Ugh, the Lex Julia. Yes, it aimed to police morality, but its application was totally dependent on status. Take the situation of a husband catching his wife in the act of adultery in his own home.
Okay.
Generally, he wasn't allowed to kill his wife. The jurists actually thought fathers were more rational judges in these situations than husbands, but he could, under very specific circumstances, kill his wife's lover.
But only if the lover was of a certain status.
Precisely. The husband was only legally allowed to kill the lover on the spot if the lover was infamous someone of legally degraded status.
Like who?
Actors, gladiators, pimps, convicted criminals, slaves. Basically, people considered socially disreputable. If the lover was another honester, another man of standing, the husband could not legally kill him. Killing him would be murder.
So the law protected the life of a high-status adulterer, but not a low-status one, even in the heat of the moment.
That's the brutal reality of how status permeated Roman law. And even if the husband did kill the infamous lover, the law still required him to divorce his wife immediately and prosecute her for adultery. The state's main concern was the disruption to the social and moral order, judged through the lens of status.
It's fascinating how status affects even family law, like with the dowry. You said the husband legally owned it, but it wasn't that simple.
Right, it's a bit of a paradox. Legally, during the marriage, the dowry belonged to the husband. But everyone, including the legal experts, sort of popularly understood it as fundamentally the woman's property meant for her support if the marriage ended.
So how did the law handle that tension between his ownership and her sort of beneficial interest?
It handled it through practical restrictions. The husband couldn't just do whatever he wanted with the dowry property. The wife, or importantly, her father, paterfamilias, retained a strong legal interest. If the marriage ended through divorce or the husband's death, she or her family had a specific legal action to reclaim the dowry.
So he had possession, but not full unrestricted control. It acknowledged her underlying claim.
Exactly. It reflected the social reality that the dowry was seen as the wife's financial security.
And finally, the state even used legal status as an incentive for having children.
Yes, another example of the state manipulating status for policy goals. The empire wanted to encourage childbirth, especially among the upper classes. So they introduced the unius liberarum, the right of children.
Usually meaning 3 children for freeborn citizens.
That was the standard threshold, yes.
Yeah.
And achieving this granted significant legal privileges.
Like what?
For men, it could mean exemption from compulsory public duties, like acting as a legal guardian tutor for someone else. For women, it was even more significant. A woman with an unius liberarum was freed from needing a male guardian for her own legal and financial affairs.
So having enough children basically granted women legal independence.
In many respects, yes. It was a major grant of autonomy. It shows the Roman state wasn't just passively reflecting social hierarchy in its laws. It was actively using legal status as a tool to shape society, to encourage certain behaviors, and to define who got which privileges. Hashtag, outro.
So wrapping this up, we've really seen 2 incredibly different approaches to keeping power in check. Athens, especially after Ephialtes and with the Graphe Paranomon, went for radical decentralization, put the power of legal scrutiny, even over proposed laws, into the hands of every citizen jury.
Which meant, everything a politician did, even their perceived character, was potentially subject to a lawsuit decided by hundreds of their peers. High stakes, constant pressure.
Whereas Rome consolidated power upwards. The emperor and his bureaucratic machine became the center of justice, operating through the cognitio system. And the law itself mirrored Roman society's obsession with rank.
Yeah, justice in Rome was filtered through status. The honestiers got legal protections and lighter penalties denied to the humiliores. Legal rights depended fundamentally on who you were.
So 2 answers to that age-old question, who guards the guardians? Athens seems to say every citizen does, with all the potential for chaos and political warfare that implies.
While Rome essentially said the emperor does, relying on his supreme auctoritas and the hierarchy beneath him, which risked impunity for the powerful and justice becoming just another perk of status.
Neither system was perfect, clearly. The Athenian model could lead to paralysis by lawsuit, fueled by rumor and political rivalry.
And the Roman model could easily entrench inequality and protect the elite, with justice flowing only from the top down.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. In our own complex world with intricate laws and, let's face it, political attacks often focusing on character, which of these ancient models feels more relevant? Is the Athenian ideal of mass citizen challenge, including things like the Graphe Paranomon against bad laws, the better safeguard?
Or does the Roman reliance on centralized authority, expertise, and, yes, status offer a more stable, if less equal, way to manage power? Something to think about when you look at how different systems today try to balance accountability, fairness, and the sheer complexity of governing.